All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Granite Files. We have been investigating the county of Henrico. For those of you who may be joining me for the first time, Henrico County is putting an FDA-defined drug into the drinking water. Yes, you heard that right. The county of Henrico is drugging you and your family. What are they drugging you with? Well, a recycled hazardous waste byproduct, of course. Yeah, this recycled hazardous waste byproduct comes from the fertilizer industry. Henrico purchases this chemical drug from a company called Univar Solutions. Univar Solutions obtains this chemical drug from a company called Nutrien, and Nutrien essentially what happens is when they are mining for phosphate, they have this hazardous waste. It's illegal to dump it into the drinking water. So what they do is they recycle it and they package it and they sell that waste as a product to Henrico County. And Henrico County decides that they are going to put this in the drinking water. Now, are they telling you that they're putting it in the drinking water? No, they're not telling you. It's not on any website. There's no ordinance. So they're largely doing this in secret. Now, they are putting this recycled hazardous waste byproduct called hydrofluorosilicic acid into the drinking water. This is a drug, folks, okay? Now, does the FDA regulate this drug that goes into our public drinking water? No. Why? Because the FDA doesn't want to take responsibility. But folks, this is legally defined as an unapproved drug. It says, danger, poison, do not take internally. Henrico County doesn't care about that. They decide they are going to put this poison into the drinking water. They dilute it in order to permanently alter your body. That is right, folks. Henrico County is permanently altering your body. They want you and your family to ingest this chemical drug from cradle to grave. Now, why would they do this, you ask? Why would they violate bodily autonomy? Why would they violate informed consent? Well, they say that they're going to do it because they want to alter your teeth. When you ingest hydrofluorosilicic acid, diluted hydrofluorosilicic acid, it changes your teeth from hydroxyapatite to fluoroapatite. This is a NHANES study that the CDC put out, and they show that we have about 58% of people who are ingesting fluoridated water will have very mild dental fluorosis. Some people will have severe dental fluorosis. The county of Henrico feels like they should, in fact, permanently alter your body. Now, what are your teeth supposed to look like? Over here, this is teeth that's made up of hydroxyapatite. Everyone should have pristine white teeth. But Henrico says, nope, we know better. We're going to put this chemical drug into the drinking water to permanently change the structure and function and color of your teeth. Okay? Now, I want to talk about the statutory authority, because that is largely what is in controversy. I have been stating for a year and a half, you do not have the statutory authority to drug the public. Now, before we jump into that, though, I want to really highlight what the county of Henrico is doing, okay? And in order to do that, I'm going to break out the handy dandy toys, right? Now, when I was in kindergarten, I was taught the difference between appropriate touching and inappropriate touching, right? So when I was in kindergarten, here is me, the teacher said that if somebody were to come along and stroke my hair, that would be a no-no. In Virginia, unwanted touching is illegal. Imagine that. If somebody came along and started stroking my hair without my consent, that would be considered a crime, okay? But when the county of Henrico permanently alters your body, they want to say that's not a crime. Now, allow me to demonstrate. Let's say you have me and you have Jody Rogish, and we're at one of his Tuckahoe talks. And let's say Jody Rogish comes over and starts petting my arm. Now, I say, please do not touch me. And he disregards that and continues to pet my arm and pet my back. That would be considered a crime. You cannot touch me without my consent. Now, equally, let's say we're at a Board of Supervisors meeting and we have the county manager, John Vitulkas, and we start talking, and as I turn around, he starts petting my head and touching my back and touching my arm. And I say, please do not touch me. I do not consent to this touching. And I turn around and he keeps doing this and starts petting my head, touching my back, touching my booty. That would be illegal in the state of Virginia. So we all know about unwanted touching. Unwanted touching is illegal. It is inconceivable that the county manager would touch me without my consent. It would never happen, not in a million years. Why? Because he's a gentleman and he knows better. Likewise, when I was at one of Jody Rogish's meeting, I asked him if he believes in informed consent, right? Does he believe in consent? He says, yes, I do believe in consent. So you would think he knows he would never touch me inappropriately without my consent, right? We all know this, folks. We learned this in kindergarten. But yet, they know they can't stroke my hair without my consent, touch my back, touch my body without my consent. But yet, these same folks are putting a chemical drug in the drinking water to permanently alter my body. How much sense does that make? They can't even stroke my hair, okay? It's not even legal to stroke my hair, but yet they think it's legal to permanently alter my body, to permanently alter my bones, to permanently alter my teeth, to permanently alter my brain, to kill off the microbiome in my mouth and in my body. How can they believe that this is appropriate, that it's appropriate to coerce the public? They cannot coerce. If Jody Rogish and the county manager got together and tried to coerce me into giving them a massage, we know that that's illegal. But yet, when they put the chemical drug in my drinking water and coerce me and my friends and my family to ingest this drug, somehow they think that's legal? No, folks. I am arguing this is not legal, okay? You cannot drug the public without their consent. In a normal, lawful world, in order to drug somebody without their consent, you would need a judge, you'd need a court order, okay? You'd have to take it to court, and there would be extreme circumstances in order to drug somebody without their consent, in order to coerce somebody into ingesting drugs, okay? This is coercion. Henrico County has a monopoly on the water. I do not have the opportunity to opt out of the water. This is active coercion, and it is a violation of number 1 of the Nuremberg Code, which states that you must have free, informed consent. You cannot coerce somebody into ingesting drugs. We don't do this. It's barbaric, it's unethical, and I would argue that it's unlawful. Okay, what is at the center of this controversy? Like I said, it has to do with statutory authority. So in Virginia, we operate under what's called the Dillon Rule. And what that means is localities in Virginia cannot do things unless the Virginia legislators authorize them to. Okay, the legislature has to grant them permission. You have to have a state law that says to Henrico County, you can do what you're doing. So an example of that would be there's a state law that says Henrico County can have a waterworks. Okay, the legislature clearly said, Henrico County, you can have a waterworks. It's called statutory authority. Okay, that's the key word here, guys, statutory authority. So Henrico County has statutory authority to have a waterworks, right? Clear as day, black and white. But does Henrico County have statutory authority to put drugs in our drinking water, to coerce the public into ingesting drugs, to cause a permanent disfigurement in you and your family? Do they have the authority to do that? And I say the answer is no. Now, here's where it gets interesting, folks. For a year and a half, I have been asking them for the statutory authority. What makes you think that you can medicate the masses with this chemical drug, right? And for a year and a half, they say, I don't know, we'll have to get back to you. I did a Freedom of Information Act request to Henrico County, asking them specifically for the statutory authority, and they responded back by saying, we don't have that record. In other words, we don't have we can't show you any statutory authority. It doesn't exist. Okay? And I'm going to show you that FOIA. Then, when I sent the cease and desist to Henrico telling them to stop, I said, provide me the statutory authority that authorizes you to drug the public. Otherwise, you need to stop. Did Henrico County respond back with any state law proving, hey, yeah, we have statutory authority and here it is? No, folks, they did not respond back with statutory authority. In other words, they could not produce a state law that clearly and expressly says that Henrico County can drug you and your family from cradle to grave, okay? So then we get into the fact that I filed for a declaratory judgment, a request for injunction, and a writ of mandamus. What did I ask the judge for? I asked the judge to declare whether or not there is a state law that authorizes Henrico to put this in the drinking water. The permanent injunction is to force Henrico County to stop putting fluoride into the drinking water, okay? Now, the writ of mandamus is to compel the county to provide pure water as defined under the law. In order to get a permanent injunction, you have to prove irreparable harm. Well, I would think that when you are permanently altering my brain and body, then that is permanently harming me. When you cannot unring this bell. Once this stuff goes into your body, it's there. You cannot get it out. When they spend money on this fluoride equipment at the waterworks, there's no way I'm ever going to get that money back. Okay? So there is irreparable harm, both physically, spiritually, and financially. Okay? So the county of Henrico, they want to say, essentially, it appears, if I'm, reading between the lines, it's almost like they're saying they want to wield a weapon at me and they want to kind of get me here and there and everywhere, but they're telling the judge until she's permanently jacked up and crippled, that's when she can come in and have an injunction. Once she's permanently damaged, once we're permanently crippled, Well, it doesn't work that way. If somebody's wielding a weapon at you, which they are putting a poison into the drinking water, which under state law, I would argue this is attempts to poison because they have information that this harms the brain and body. So they understand, and I believe that when they continue to do this, it shows intent to harm and injure another person. Okay, let's table that for a minute and get back to the statutory authority. All right, so they feel like they have the statutory authority to drug you. Now, they did not say this again a year and a half ago. They could not produce a state law. When I spoke to them at the Board of Supervisors meetings, they could not produce a state law. When I did a cease and desist, they could not produce a state law. When I did a Freedom of Information Act request, they could not produce a state law. And I said cease and desist. Okay, so they cannot produce a state law. When they filed this demurrer, in other words, they're telling the judge, Judge, you need to throw this out. Okay, essentially it's kind of like a motion to dismiss. They stated, and I'll show you guys again, they stated that they have expressed statutory authority to put this chemical drug in the drinking water. Did they cite that express statutory authority? No, folks. No, they did not. So, what did I do after receiving this demurrer? I did a Freedom of Information Act request to Henrico, again, asking them for the statutory authority. Now remember, they didn't have that when I asked a little while ago, about a month or so ago. They said they don't have the statutory authority, but now they produced some state laws claiming that these state laws that they provided me shows that they have express statutory authority. Okay, we're going to look over that. Before we dive into those documents, I will remind you guys again what express statutory authority looks like. Okay, it's that proposed 1952 bill where the General Assembly would have granted the authority to put fluoride into the drinking water, and then they would have granted Virginia Department of Health to promulgate regulations therewith. Okay, so we know what express statutory authority looks like, and then we'll pop over to what the county claims is statutory authority, and we will see. Okay, in my opinion, the county of Henrico is wasting everybody's time and money. They know, in my opinion, it's clear as day that they do not have the statutory authority to drug you and your family from cradle to grave. Why are they holding on to this so hard? And just one last thing, if y'all recall, for a long time, they said that they don't have statutory authority because they say that Virginia Department of Health is forcing them to put it into the drinking water. Remember, that's what started this whole thing. They said for months and months and months and months, we don't need a state law that grants us the authority. That's why they couldn't produce a state law, because VDH has the authority to force them into putting this into the drinking water. Okay, that's what's so problematic for the county in this particular situation. They thought VDH was forcing them. And so that's why they were all smug, saying, we don't need to show you a state law because VDH is forcing us. We don't have statutory authority because this is VDH. Then they realized it's not VDH. VDH cannot require water fluoridation. And then for more than a year, they said they could not produce a statutory authority, and they could not produce statutory authority in the demurrer. Okay, so what are we doing here, folks? What are we doing? Well, I will show you, and then you guys can decide if whether or not Henrico County has statutory authority. Let's go over it. Gosh, this is like beating a dead horse for the love. Let's get started, guys. Okay, guys, so this is the cease and desist that I sent to Henrico County. I want to show you this just to jog your memory of what express statutory authority would look like. Okay, so here would be an example of a state law that clearly authorizes the county of Henrico to put drugs into the drinking water. Remember, this bill didn't pass. Okay, so the Virginia General Assembly never granted statutory authority to drug the public, which is why Henrico has a hard time. If the legislature wanted to allow localities in Virginia to use the waterworks as a mechanism to mass medicate the public, then they would have passed Senate Bill number 106, offered January 21st, 1952. The General Assembly did not pass this bill. Instead, the legislators went in a different direction that required pure water. Remember, our laws require pure water as defined under the code. The legislators chose laws that treated water, not people. The current laws on the books require potability only. Okay, the current laws in Virginia require pure water, which means that you remove the contaminations from the water to make it safe to drink. We do not have any laws in Virginia that authorizes Henrico to medicate the masses. Okay, so this 1952 bill would have done two things. This is very important. This is what express statutory authority looks like. One, authorize the cities to fluoridate the water, and two, authorize the State Board of Health to promulgate regulations. So one, you need the Virginia General Assembly to authorize Henrico to drug the public, and two, the Virginia General Assembly would have had to authorize Virginia Department of Health to make regulations in connection with drugging the public. Okay. So we have Senate Bill number 106, offered January 21st, 1952. This bill never passed, but it's a good example because it shows what statutory authority would look like if it existed. So this is a bill to authorize cities having water supplies to fluoridate the water and to provide for regulations in connection therewith. And it says, be it enacted, the General Assembly of Virginia, each city of the Commonwealth which maintains and operates a water system may chemically treat the water. Okay, this doesn't authorize them to treat people. It authorizes them to treat the water therewith, so as to dissolve in such water fluorine to a concentration as established by regulations adopted by the State Board of Health. In other words, it would allow Henrico County to put fluoride in the water, and VDH can make regulations to be the watchdogs of that. This did not pass. The State Board of Health is directed to prescribe by regulations adopted and promulgated by it the manner in which fluoridation of water shall be accomplished in accordance with provisions of 1 hereof, and the concentration which shall be attained by such fluoridation process. Copy of such regulations shall be sent to the Director of Public Works and other appropriate official of each city in this Commonwealth, and no fluoridation water system shall be approved by the Department of Health unless it complies with the regulations established by the State Board of Health. Now, here's a few things I want to point out. One, this bill would have been a problem because it authorizes localities to treat the water. You don't need fluoride to treat the water. In fact, nobody's saying that they're putting fluoride into the water to treat the water. They're saying that they're putting it into the drinking water in order to treat people, in order to permanently alter your teeth. So because you don't need it to treat the water, this would be ridiculous, right? So one, you're committing fraud if you're saying you're claiming that you're using it to treat the water when in fact you're using it to treat the people. And two, people could say, well, you can remove fluoride and the water's still safe to drink. In fact, when you stop intentionally adding hydrofluorosilicic acid to the drinking water, the water's actually safer to drink. Okay, so you don't need this to treat the water, and they're not using it to treat the water. Okay, so I want to stress that. Two, in this draft bill, they said that water fluoridation was to, I don't have the exact language in front of me, but something to the effect of it needs to be beneficial to the health of the inhabitants of such city. They scratched out that line, and they either scratched out the line because they did not think that ingesting a diluted poison actually benefited the health of the inhabitants, or they questioned whether or not ingesting a diluted poison benefits the health of the inhabitants. Either they didn't think it was going to benefit them, or they had serious doubts. Okay, so notice in this bill, they're not saying that this promotes health. They're not even stating what they allege that the reason is to treat the water, right? And you don't actually need fluoride to treat the water. That's not why it's in the water. It's used in the water to drug you and your family from cradle to grave. Okay, so, and then what's the other part that I wanted to point out? This is 1952, so VDH, if you look at their meeting minutes, there was conditions. So if this bill had passed, they had already written up conditions as to for localities. So in other words, this bill says, all right, you can drug the public, but you have to drug the public in accordance with whatever VDH dictates. And I believe it was 5 conditions that VDH had. One of them was an ordinance, right? You have to pass an ordinance. Another was you had to get doctors involved. Remember, this is a drug. So VDH in their conditions said, like, you need to get doctors involved in this conversation. And there was a few others that I can't remember right off the bat, but there were conditions. Now, this law never passed, but again, I'm pointing this out because this is what express statutory authority looks like. So VDH, they claim that there is express statutory authority. So we should be, when I pull up the FOIA response, we should be seeing something similar in nature to this, okay? So you have an example of what express statutory authority looks like. So that's what we're looking for, folks. All right, before we get over to the FOIA to show them what they're claiming is statutory authority, let's jump over to a previous FOIA that I did where I contacted Henrico and asked for statutory authority. So let's jump into that now. All right, here we go. So this is going to be the request for statutory authority. Okay, I asked again, request for statutory authority. That is the controversy. I said I am requesting the specific record statutory authority relied upon by the county to lawfully add fluoride to the public drinking water. For clarity, I am not requesting regulatory recommendations. I am aware of 12 VAC 5-590-930, which states the board recommends fluoridation. A recommendation is not a statutory requirement or authorization. Okay, I just showed you guys what statutory authority would look like. Under Virginia's application of the Dillon Rule, local governments and authorities, so in other words, Henrico, they are a local government. Local governments and authorities possesses only those powers expressly granted by the General Assembly. So do we have a state law that expressly granted the county of Henrico to drug the public? No, we do not. Necessarily or fairly implied. is there a state law that implies that Henrico County can drug the public? No, there is not. So necessarily implied from those express powers or essential and indispensable to their delegated purpose. In other words, is it essential to drug the public in order to achieve pure water? No. We have laws that require pure water. So is it expressly authorized that Henrico can drug the public? No. Is there a state law that implies they can drug the public? No. And is it essential to drug the public in order to provide pure water? Absolutely not. Any reasonable doubt is resolved against the locality. In other words, if it's not expressly authorized, it's not necessarily or fairly implied by the state law, and it's not essential, then if there seems to be doubt, then that means that the citizens win and Henrico does not. Any reasonable doubt is resolved against the locality. So if there's doubt, it's going to be resolved against the county of Henrico. All right, let's move on. Accordingly, the addition of fluoride to public drinking water must be supported by clear statutory authority. In the absence of an explicit or necessarily implied grant of authority in the Code of Virginia, such action raises serious questions about its legality. Please identify the exact record Virginia Code sections that authorizes the County of Henrico to lawfully fluoridate the community drinking water. Thank you for your time and attention to this matter. I look forward to your response. All right, and then what did I do? I showed them some examples of what express statutory authority looks like. So this is a Minnesota state law, and it shows clear statutory authority. And then under the best interpretation doctrine, the Code of Virginia requires treating water, not people. So there are two laws. We have Code of Virginia 32.1-12, 32.1-170, and there's actually another one. I believe it's also in 32.1-169. We'll get over to that. So in other words, they're under the best interpretation doctrine, it clearly says that you're supposed to treat water to make the water safe to drink. In other words, we're removing contaminations from the drinking water to make the water safe to drink. And then this is 12 VAC 5-590-930. The Virginia Department of Health Board recommends water fluoridation. Several things. One, I don't believe they have statutory authority. Two, it appears that they violated the state law because they never actually notified the public that they were making this regulation. They notified the public that they were going to make a regulation in regards to pure water. They never notified, as far as I can tell, they never notified the public that they were going to write a regulation regarding water fluoridation. Okay, and we dug that up from the Richmond Times-Dispatch newspaper articles. So yeah, okay, pure water. Oh, and also, if you didn't see the last video, Health and Human Services doesn't actually recommend water fluoridation. So technically speaking, when it says the board recommends water fluoridation as determined by HHS, HHS does not recommend water fluoridation. So technically speaking, that means VDH does not recommend water fluoridation. And that tracks because I've spoken to the VDH board members in 2024, 2025, and 2026, and not a single one of them recommends water fluoridation. Okay, so they personally don't recommend water fluoridation, and because HHS doesn't recommend water fluoridation, then one can only extrapolate that the board doesn't recommend water fluoridation. So I know that that's getting a little nitpicky and getting into the semantics, but it technically, legally, I would think it matters, in my opinion. All right, let's move on. So we talk about the requirements. I go on. These are the laws that we have. The Code of Virginia 32, sorry, it's not highlighting, 32.1-167, and it says pure water means water fit for human consumption that is sanitary and normally free of minerals, organic substance, and toxic agents. I just showed you hydrofluorosilicic acid is a toxic agent. So it's inconceivable that you would go out of your way to purchase a toxic agent to put into the drinking water to drug the public. Under the best interpretation doctrine, anyone who has, two brain cells can understand that pure water means that you make the water as pure as possible. You don't use the water to drug the public. All right, so it says, so you're getting rid of minerals, organic substances, you're getting rid of toxic agents in excess of reasonable amounts. Is it reasonable to go out of your way to add the toxic agent to the water? I think not. All right, and adequate in quantity and quality for the minimum health requirements of the person served. People who have thyroid problems, they are told not to drink fluoridated water. People who have kidney problems are told not to drink fluoridated water. Pregnant women are told not to drink the fluoridated water. Mothers who have babies are told not to mix the formula with fluoridated water because it will cause damage to their brain and possibly dental fluorosis. So there's a lot of people who are not supposed to drink fluoridated water. People who don't want their microbiome altered. There's a whole laundry list. All right, so let's move on. All right, so I requested for statutory authority, and on April 6, 2026, so this is, just a few months ago, they responded, meaning the County of Henrico, responded back and said, the record you are requesting is not owned or maintained by Henrico County. Okay, in other words, Henrico County they claim that they do not have a record showing the statutory authority. Now, if you're going to read between the lines, this means that the County of Henrico is admitting that they don't have the statutory authority. That's how I interpret this using common sense, okay? So, again, after this, I sent the cease and desist, telling them, provide me the statutory authority. They did not provide anything. Now, let's jump over to the demurrer and see if they provided the statutory authority, shall we? All right, guys, let's take a look at the demurrer. So here we have it. It says, plaintiff is not entitled to a permanent injunction because the county's use of fluoride in public drinking water is expressly authorized by statute and related state regulations, and plaintiff has presented no basis for the court to provide any form of injunction. Well, I have provided a basis for the court to provide an injunction, so this is a dishonest statement, in my opinion. This whole paragraph is dishonest. Where is the clearly established statutory authority? They say that the county's use of fluoride in public drinking water is expressly authorized by statute. You would expect for them to cite the statute right here. They did not cite the statute. Now, let's go up a little bit and see if they cited the statute anywhere else. Now, let's take a look at this paragraph right here. They say that Henrico County has expressed statutory authority to operate its community water works. Yes, that is what they're claiming. I don't deny that they have statutory authority to operate a waterworks, but what I am saying is that what I am alleging is that they do not have statutory authority to put hydrofluorosilicic acid in the drinking water. This is a drug. Where is the law that authorizes you to drug the public? This is not ethical. This is a violation of Nuremberg Code. Remember, the Board of Supervisors, they can't come along and stroke my hair, right? That's unwanted touching. But they want to claim that they can permanently alter your body. Does that make any sense to you? Does that sound rational or ethical? To me, I say no. Okay, so we know they did not cite the statutory authority for water fluoridation here. And then, and this is the only other part, they claim, I guess they just want to tell the judge, like, trust me, judge, there is express statutory authority. We're not going to tell you what that express statutory authority is, but, just trust us. That's what they put here in the demurrer. Why are they wasting so much of our taxpayer money on this issue? Why are they fighting so hard to put a diluted poison into the water? Why are they fighting so hard to coerce the public into ingesting drugs? Why are they fighting so hard to violate people's informed consent? Not theoretically, supposedly, from my understanding, is all of the board members are Democrats. Now, upon information and belief, there's at least one who is a Republican but ran as a Democrat. That seems rather dishonest to me if that's true, but that's neither here nor there. We're getting off the topic. What I'm saying is this is ridiculous. Okay, so after receiving this demurrer, they claim they've got statutory authority. Okay, so I did a Freedom of Information Act request to see if they can cough something up, right? Remember, for a year and a half, they don't claim statutory authority. First, they said there's no statutory authority because VDH is forcing us to put it into the drinking water. So we don't need to show you a law because VDH, that's on VDH. All right, they realized that they were mistaken. Okay, we're going to say, I don't know if they're evil or ignorant, right? And either way, either they're evil and they lied to me or they're incompetent. Whichever way you slice it, it's bad, okay? So they don't have statutory authority because they're blaming it on VDH. Once I said, you've got to stop doing this, then they switched over and said that they couldn't produce a statutory authority. We go on and on and on and on and on, and still we get to this demurrer, and there's no statutory authority. I did the Freedom of Information Act request, no statutory authority, right? This is the crux of the issue, folks. All right, so let's jump over to the Freedom of Information Act request that I did just a few days ago. The county was responsive and responded back lickety split. So I do appreciate the speediness. Do appreciate how fast that they responded back to me. So let's jump into it. All right, guys. So this is the FOIA that I sent just a few days ago, June 6, 2026. Again, the subject is request for express statutory authority and expressed regulations, water fluoridation, FOIA. Dear Henrico County, Virginia, please provide the specific Virginia statutes upon which the county relies for its assertion that the county's use of fluoride in public drinking water is expressly authorized by statute. Please provide the regulations that the county relies upon to assert that the county's use of fluoride in public drinking water is expressly authorized by state regulations. Okay, so again, the demurrer, they say, quote, that the county's use of fluoride in public drinking water is expressly authorized by statute. They don't tell me what the statute is, they just pinky promise that it's there. Okay, remember, they have not said what the statutory authority is for a year and a half, right? They just promise that it exists right now, but they're not going to tell me what it is. So I did this FOIA, and let me show you how they responded. Okay, so they responded back with 1, 2, 3 state laws and 1 regulation, Virginia Administrative Code. Let's take a look at, I don't know, let's take a look at this one down here first. All right, what do we have? Now, remember, just a few months ago, they couldn't produce a record from the LIS, but now they can produce a record from LIS. Okay, for those of you who may not be from Virginia, LIS is essentially the site that you can use in order to find Virginia state laws. Okay, so the county had access to LIS several months ago. They have access to LIS now, and I would imagine that the attorneys have the state, like a physical book of the state laws, right, over in the county. So I find it hard to imagine that they did not have the LIS back in, what was it, April, but they do have LIS now, right? I'm not sure what they're doing. They refused to give me the state law when I did the cease and desist. They refused to give me the state law, for a year and a half. They are drugging you and your family from cradle to grave, and they would not even provide the state law that authorizes them to drug you, okay? I believe that what they are doing is egregious, okay? Who drugs you largely in secret and will not even give you the state law that authorizes them to drug pregnant women and babies? Okay, that's what's going on here. Who drugs you and causes permanent disfigurement, and they will not even provide you the law that drugs you, okay, that authorizes them to drug you, okay? We supposedly we live in a free country, supposedly. I mean, it's remarkable that all these other countries, they understand that it's a violation of bodily autonomy to put drugs in the public drinking water. But no, not the Henrico Board of Supervisors, not the county manager, John Vitulkas, not the DPU director, Bentley Chan, not the waterworks operators. All right, I digress. So finally, after more than a year and a half, they cough up a state law that they claim expressly authorizes them to drug you and your family. Now, they claim that this law that I'm about to show you expressly authorizes the county to put the drugs in the drinking water. You know what a law looks like that expressly authorizes it, that 1952 bill. Okay, so we're looking for something similar to that. So let's take a look. This is going to be the Code of Virginia. Okay, this is our state laws here, folks. Code of Virginia 15.2-2109, powers of localities as to public utilities and computer services, prevention of pollution of certain water. Guys, this is remarkable, being that they are the ones that are polluting the water. Okay, they are putting a poison. Remember, this is a poison. This is a toxin. This is a recycled hazardous waste byproduct. And they're going to respond with a law that the title says prevention of pollution when they are putting the pollutant in the water. They are the reason as to why the water is polluted. All right, let's go on. Let's see if we can zoom into this a little bit better. All right, let's see what it says, folks. Any locality may acquire or otherwise obtain control of, or to establish, maintain, or operate extended, enlarge. Is that what that says? Yeah, extended, enlarge waterworks, sewer, gas works, electrical plants, public mass transportation. Okay, la-di-da. So, in other words, this law allows Henrico County to operate a waterworks. Congratulations, Henrico County. You found the law that allows you to operate a waterworks. Where does it say this law allows you to put drugs in the drinking water? Can you put Viagra in the drinking water? No. Can you put vitamin C in the drinking water? No. Can you put cholesterol medicine in the drinking water? No. Can you put vaccines in the drinking water? No. This law, you claim that this law expressly authorizes you to put drugs in the drinking water. I beg to differ. I think your understanding of the law is misplaced, in my opinion, based on basic reading comprehension. Okay, this is a plain reading of the law. And they go on to say whatever land may be necessary for acquiring, locating, establishing, maintaining, operating. All right, I'm not going to read any more of this. It's ridiculous. This doesn't expressly authorize you to put it in the drinking water. It doesn't imply that you can drug people. And it's not necessary to carry out the duties of running a waterworks. Okay, folks, this is ridiculous. Remember, Henrico County is taking our taxpayer money to pay these lawyers probably several $100s an hour to produce this. This is where our money's going. This is how they're responding. Anyone who lives in Henrico should be outraged. This is a waste. Let's check out. I don't know, guys. Okay, this is the Virginia Administrative Code. Let's look at the second state law that clearly expressly authorizes them to put drugs in the drinking water. Let's go with this one right here. This is going to be Code of Virginia 32.1-12, regulations, variances, and exemptions. Says the board. Now here, they're not talking about the Henrico board, folks, just so you know. They're talking about the Virginia Department of Health board. So this is going to be the Virginia Department of Health board may make, adopt, promulgate, and enforce such regulations and provide for reasonable variance and exemptions therefrom as may be necessary to carry out the provisions of this title being 32.1 health. So this title and other laws of the Commonwealth administered by the Commissioner of the Department. Okay. All right, let's start off. Does this law clearly and expressly authorize the county of Henrico to put drugs in the water? This law doesn't even have anything to do with Henrico County. What does this law have to do with? This is the Virginia General Assembly writing a law as to what the Virginia Department of Health can do. Okay, so remember, Henrico County claims that there is a state law that expressly authorizes them to put drugs in the drinking water. This law doesn't even have anything to do with Henrico, but this is what they responded with. This law has to do with what Virginia Department of Health can and cannot do. So let's go over it. The board may make, adopt, and promulgate and enforce such regulations. Okay, in other words, this law says that VDH can make regulations, can write regulations. Okay, congratulations. And provide for reasonable variance and exemptions therefrom as may be necessary to carry out the provisions of this title and other laws of the Commonwealth administered by the Commissioner of the Department. Now, VDH can make regulations, but they can only make regulations that the Virginia General Assembly authorized them to do. Okay, so the Virginia General Assembly, they passed a law requiring pure water. VDH can make regulations in order to carry out the wishes of the Virginia General Assembly to ensure pure water. Okay, we have a state law for pure water. VDH can make regulations to make sure that localities provide pure water. The Virginia General Assembly clearly explained what they meant by pure water. They clearly said you remove contaminations from the drinking water to make it safe to drink. Okay? So this law right here is essentially saying, hey, when we pass state laws, we're going to allow you to make regulations that are in order to carry out our wishes. Okay? This has nothing to do with nothing, basically. This is just noise, okay? I mean, this right here is nearly meaningless, okay? Does this law say that VDH, these are the questions. Does this law say that Henrico County can put fluoride in the drinking water? No. Does it say that Henrico County can put drugs in the drinking water? No. Does this law say anything about fluoride or drugs? No. Does this law clearly and expressly authorize VDH to create laws themselves? No. VDH cannot write laws, okay? VDH cannot do that. So, strike two, Henrico. Remember, guys, they're charging us, our tax-paying money is going towards these attorneys who are producing this nonsense. All right, let's move on to the next one. Ridiculous. What a waste of time, folks. Absolute waste of time. Let's move on to the third state law that they've responded back. All right, remember the question that we are asking is does 32.1-169 supervision of the board say that Henrico County can put drugs in the drinking water? Okay, remember, I did a FOIA request asking for the statutory authority. It has to be clearly spelled out, the statutory authority that authorizes Henrico to put hydrofluorosilicic acid into the drinking water. And they are trying to tell me that this state law, 32.1-169 supervision of the board, authorizes the county of Henrico to put drugs in the drinking water. Well, guys, you should know by now what's the problem, right? There's a glaringly obvious problem right here. And this has to do with supervision of the board, the Virginia Department of Health Board. The Virginia General Assembly wrote this state law regarding supervision of the board. This has nothing to do with the county of Henrico, okay? Well, I take that back. This in a roundabout way, this affects the county of Henrico, and I'll explain why. But the law is directed primarily first at VDH, and then second, then Henrico County is affected by it. But this state law does not clearly authorize Henrico County to put fluoride in the drinking water, to put hydrofluorosilicic acid in the drinking water, to put drugs in the drinking water, nothing. All right, let's look at what this law does. So this has to do with the Virginia Department of Health Board. Let's zoom into this a little bit better if we can. It says, let's look, there we go. These people, it is such a waste of time. Why are they doing this? Why? That's what I want to know. Who is paying them to deliberately contaminate our drinking water with a well-known neurotoxin that a federal judge has ruled poses an unreasonable risk of injury? The FDA has barred doctors from prescribing fluoride to children. But no, waterworks operators, they can drug your kids all day long. How much sense does that make, folks? All right, so it says the board shall have general supervision. Remember, this is the VDH board. The board shall have general supervision and control over all water supplies and waterworks in the Commonwealth. But the General Assembly clearly told them what they mean, okay? So you can't just dream up whatever you want. Insofar as the bacteriological, chemical, radiological, and physical quality of waters furnished for human consumption may affect the public health and welfare and may require that all water supplies be pure water. And there's a definition as to what pure water means. Okay, I'm going to read that again. It says the board shall have general supervision and control over water supplies and waterworks in the Commonwealth insofar as the bacteriological, chemical, radiological, and physical quality of waters furnished for human consumption may affect the public and welfare and may require that all water supplies be pure water. Does this say that Henrico County can put drugs in the drinking water, largely in secret? Does this say that VDH can be the essentially the fluoride god and grant Henrico the permission? No. VDH, they can't give Henrico County permission to put fluoride in the drinking water. That's where the county of Henrico is so confused. VDH does not possess the authority to give the green light to put fluoride in the drinking water. It has to come from the Virginia General Assembly. The Virginia General Assembly did not grant Henrico the authority to put drugs in the drinking water. This law, specifically, the Virginia General Assembly is telling the board, you can oversee pure water. We want you to make sure that you're getting rid of bacteriological, chemical, radiological, and physical qualities. Okay, so in other words, you're getting rid of bacteria, you're getting rid of chemicals, you're getting rid of radiological substances, which that in itself is terrifying. And here's what's so scary. Hydrofluorosilicic acid, because fluorine is so excitable and binds to everything, when they are mining the phosphate, the hazardous waste, it winds up being contaminated with radiological substances. This stuff binds to lead, it binds to arsenic, it binds to aluminum, cadmium, all sorts of nasty stuff. And then the county of Henrico puts all of this garbage into our drinking water in order to cause disfigurement. They think this is good. They think permanently altering your children's body is good and that they feel like it's appropriate. Remember, they understand that stroking my hair is inappropriate, but they don't understand that coercing us into ingesting a poison is not appropriate. I swear they need to go back to kindergarten. All right, let's move on. So then they say, so essentially the board is required to, Virginia General Assembly is saying to VDH, you need to make sure that localities produce pure water, and we're explaining to you what we mean by that, okay? So does this law expressly authorize the county of Henrico to put fluoride in the drinking water? No. Does it allow them to put any drugs in the drinking water? No. Is it implied? No. Is it essential to carry out the duties of pure water? No, it does not. They go on to say, in exercising such provisions and control, the board shall recognize that the relationship between the owner's financial, technical, and managerial and operational capabilities and the capacity to comply with state and federal drinking water standards. In other words, some localities can have exemptions if they are strapped for money, like smaller localities. So in other words, if you're a small town and you don't have a lot of money, VDH will allow you to have more contaminations in the drinking water than, say, the county of Henrico. Okay, so if you're poor, you're going to have dirtier water, okay, is essentially what they're saying. And then this goes on to say that the board may adopt regulations establishing maximum contaminant levels in all water supplies and waterworks in the Commonwealth. So maximum contaminant levels, that has to do with the national primary drinking water standard. So we're not going to go into that in this because it's not relevant. All right, let's see the Virginia Administrative Code. So this is strike 3. They have not produced statutory authority. All right, this is the last one. This is not even a state law. I mean, I did ask for the state laws and the regulations. So we just went over the state laws that they claim granted them express statutory authority. It didn't pan out, right? It doesn't exist. So here is the regulation that they are using to claim that they have the legal authority to put drugs in the drinking water. Now remember, in order for VDH to get away with it, or forgive me, in order for Henrico County to get away with drugging the public, they would have needed a state law. They don't have a state law. So now they want to say that this regulation, Virginia Administrative Code, grants Henrico the authority to put drugs in the drinking water. So let's see. What they are going to be pointing to, this is going to be 12 VAC 5-590-510, acceptable operating practices. And it says here that the board, again, this is the Virginia Department of Health board, recommends that all community waterworks in the Commonwealth deliver the optimal fluoride concentration as determined by the United States Public Health. Again, the United States Department of Health and Human Services does not recommend water fluoridation, okay? It's not a thing, okay? And not only that, is HHS Secretary Kennedy says that putting fluoride in the drinking water is barbaric, monstrous, evil. He acknowledges that this is a waste, and he does not agree with localities actively putting a recycled hazardous waste byproduct in the water. So, technically speaking, Health and Human Services does not recommend water fluoridation, which means that the Virginia Department of Health Board does not recommend water fluoridation. And like I said, I confirmed this in 2024, 2025, and 2026. And I confronted them on phone, on email, and in person. And not a single board member recommended water fluoridation. So in person, they don't recommend it. And according to their own regulation, if you understand that HHS doesn't recommend it, that means that the Virginia Department of Health Board does not recommend it. Okay? So, not only that let's pretend for a moment that HHS did recommend it, which they don't. But let's pretend. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's say HHS recommended it, which means that the board recommends it, even though neither of that is true. Just because there's a recommendation, does that magically give Henrico County the authority to put the drug in the drinking water? No, folks. Why? You need statutory authority. You don't have it. Moreover, because we now have so much evidence showing that this harms the brain and body, it's inconceivable that anybody can get away with putting this in the drinking water. It's just undisputable. Okay, guys? It takes so long for the government to catch up with reality. They just want to hold on to this as long as possible. Why? Because 70 years they have been promoting putting a hazardous waste byproduct into the drinking water. And they know that this doesn't look good for them, right? It undermines the credibility of the health department. It undermines the credibility of the government. And boy, does the government hate looking bad. Think about all the things that they were wrong about. They said smoking was healthy. They were wrong about that. They did the food pyramid and told everyone to eat a bunch of grains. They were wrong about that. I remember when they did that, I remember the conversation with my mother, with them laughing about how ridiculous this is, and that the reason why they did it is because of the government subsidies to the farmers growing grains. Okay, so we all knew that that was ridiculous. We knew that they lied about smoking. Don't eat fats, right? That's a bad thing. Eat all the sugar instead of fat. We know that that was a lie. We know the COVID-19 scandal, right? So don't believe them with that. We know about CDC Tuskegee experiment. They did bloodletting for 2,000 years. They thought that thalidomide was fantastic and was trying to hold on to that. They used to put mercury. Here's how sinister our government is, okay? Babies, when they were teething, doctors would give these mothers powder. It was a mercury powder, and would tell them to put it on their gums. And it was making the babies permanently go to sleep. And the doctors told the mothers that it was the fact that they were teething that made the babies go to sleep in a way that was not reversible. And as it turned out, it was the mercury powder that they were putting on them. Nurses would put mercury on people's like burns, and the nurses would get it and it would go into their skin and it would cause them to become insane. And people would say that it's just women and that they were prone to hysteria, when in fact it was the mercury. Children who had autism, and obviously does currently still have autism, the government told the mothers that the reason why their children were brain damaged was because they were frigid, and they called them refrigerator moms. In other words, the environment, it seems to be, there's a mountain of evidence to show that the chemical exposures that children are being exposed to is causing autism. But instead of looking at the environmental factors, they blamed autism on mothers and said that they were refrigerator moms, and accused the mothers of not loving their children enough. Okay? Our government is evil. Okay? Chemical companies are evil. Okay? And so they want to hold on to this as hard as possible. And I want you to really understand that the county of Henrico is actively fighting me to keep this poison in the drinking water. Okay? They want to continue deliberately diluting this poison into the drinking water. Okay? Now, I've shown you the evidence of what they claim is express statutory authority. So you tell me what you think. Does Henrico County have statutory authority to do this? Is this ethical? Does this violate number 1 of the Nuremberg Code? These are the questions that you should be asking. If you agree with me, make sure to leave a comment below. If you disagree with me, leave a comment below and tell me where I may have gotten it wrong. Okay, guys? But in the meantime, the County of Henrico is still going to be spending probably thousands of dollars. I mean, if they've got 3 attorneys on this, each attorney probably makes a couple $100 an hour. They are spending thousands of dollars just writing up these responses, okay? What a waste of taxpayer money to actively cause disfigurement. Why are they doing this, guys? Why on God's green acres would they coerce toddlers into ingesting a diluted poison? It's absurd, it's barbaric, it's evil, in my opinion. But anyway, that's going to be it for today. Make sure that you guys leave a thumbs up, comment below, and share this with others. I will see you next time on the Granite Files. Talk to you later, guys. Bye.